Whenever we speak about the biggest disappointments in Naruto, more often than not, you're gonna hear someone talk about Naruto's supposed lackluster time skip. After going on an almost 3-year training period, Naruto returned with seemingly underwhelming fruits of his labor, which led a lot of Naruto fans to come to the conclusion that Naruto's time skip was completely worthless. I have my own problems with this criticisms, but if I were to summarize what those were, it would be that this take, while not being completely outrageous, lacks a lot of context and is at best a blatant misreading of the text. I've discussed this topic on numerous occasions in the past, mostly to justify it. However, in recent months, my perspective on the topic has shifted partly due to personal maturity, but also further research, which is why today I've gathered here every argument and piece of evidence I've seen in relation to Naruto's time skip to determine whether or not it's actually the case. But before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe. We're shooting for 20k. Now, before I start going into the reasons as to why the time skip may not have lived up to its expectations, I think it makes a lot of sense to establish a baseline for how strong Naruto actually was coming out of the 3-year training period. The most common claim that people make is that Naruto came back weaker than everyone else, and also the fact that he didn't really learn any new jutsu, as opposed to Sasuke, who came back with a myriad of new abilities. I'll touch on the lack of extended arsenal in a bit, but I do want to take a look at the initial claim, since I think it's not really rooted in any real evidence. The argument that Naruto is somehow the weakest among the time skip genin, now turned Chunin and Jonin, is purely a matter of optics, and there really isn't anything that supports it. As a matter of fact, there is more evidence that Naruto is the strongest or in the upper echelon than there is evidence of the contrary. In chapter 281, Danzo tells us verbatim that both Naruto and Sai are stronger than their peers, which would mean that Naruto is at the bare minimum stronger than the other members of his graduating class. Danzo is a high-ranking official in Konoha and the Anbu, which is the most robust intelligence agency on the planet, so any information he has would most likely be accurate. There is nothing that happens in Konoha that Danzo does not know about. Now, the context of what this means also changes depending on your interpretation of peer, since as I said, it could be in reference to the genin he graduated with, but it could also equally extend to the other Leaf Shinobi in Konoha who were around his age. This would include characters such as Neji, Lee, and Tenten, which would greatly upscale Naruto's power since Neji was promoted to Jonin over the time skip. Now, I'm not 100% on board with Team Guy's inclusion since I feel there's a lot more room for scrutiny with that interpretation. However, Naruto's feats surprisingly add to its consistency, and he doesn't really have a lot of anti-feats. For example, in Naruto's first encounter with Lady Chiyo, he's able to react to a blitz attempt on Kakashi and parry her attack, sending her back a good distance. Keep in mind that Chiyo at this moment is trying to get revenge on Kakashi for her dead son, so there is no reason for her to be holding back. This same Chiyo is able to react to and avoid point-blank attacks from Satsuri Sirocco Puppet, as well as keep up in speed with Sakura, who is able to react to and destroy the third Kazekage Puppet. This would in turn give Naruto this scaling as well, at least in speed, since Naruto is relative in physicals to a bloodlusted Chiyo. As it relates to power, I don't think that it needs a lot of explanation since durability in Naruto is pretty ass comparatively, unless you have a specific jutsu to amp your defense, such as the 4th Raikage's Lightning Cloak, which makes it so that most people within the verse is just gonna get taken out by a Rasengan to the chest. The problem with this though, and all the justifications I gave leading up to this point, is that none of this really matters unless the readers feel this increase in power while reading the series. We can make all the arguments we want about how Naruto technically came back far stronger through chain scaling, but the average anime watcher is never going to be doing these sorts of analyses, and as such, this entire argument is meaningless to a certain extent, though this may not be entirely a bad thing for reasons I'll mention in the final conclusion. Now, as it relates to Naruto not learning anything new over the time skip, that's pretty much just a fact, and any sort of argument against this is just arguing in bad faith. You could possibly make an argument for Naruto learning the Odama Rasengan and possibly gaining access to Kurama influence or KM0, but that's mostly just a cop-out, and that's obviously not what people mean when they say that he didn't learn anything. What people mean when they say this is that Naruto didn't learn anything new or particularly unique. The Odama Rasengan is just a bigger, more powerful Rasengan that still requires Naruto to use shadow clones to be able to perform it. If it was the case that Naruto came back with a giant Odama Rasengan plus being able to use it one-handed, I could see that being a lot more reasonable to people's expectations, but at the end of the day, that's not what we got. The only justification I can think for this is that Naruto is simply incapable of learning any jutsu that isn't basic or like the Rasengan. During the month-long training arc between the semifinals and the final rounds of the Chunin exams, Jiraiya explains to Naruto that he doesn't really have any talent for chakra control or talent in general, while also imparting a bit of advice to Naruto about how he should pursue strength given his circumstances. The gist of it is that people like Naruto who have a lot of power and little talent in chakra control shouldn't worry themselves with complex hand signs and the like, but should rather focus on exercises and techniques that simply require them to put a whole lot of chakra in. He specifically says that everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses and their own personal style, so it makes no sense to try and force yourself to get better in a way that just doesn't suit you. This is the exact reason why he taught Naruto the summoning jutsu, and is the reason why he taught Naruto the Rasengan as well. He tells Naruto that the Rasengan is the perfect jutsu for him since it doesn't have any complex hand signs for him to mess up, and Naruto basically ran with the philosophy. To be totally honest though, this makes a lot of sense to me, because just looking at it from a practical standpoint, Naruto was never going to be weaving a bunch of hand signs and casting dark swamp or fire flame bombs. It's simply just not his style, and I don't see a world where Naruto is weaving 10 seals to pull off a jutsu. That's mostly the case for characters like Sasuke, Kakashi, and the like. If Naruto was ever going to learn a new jutsu over the time skip, it would have to be one with a singular hand sign, some variation of the Rasengan, or a jutsu that is similar in nature that would only require him to output and control chakra externally, since it's pretty evident that the jutsu needs to be hands-on and right in front of him so he can feel it out practically. A lot of people actually wanted him to learn the Rasen Shuriken, which would be cool if he actually learned it over the time skip, but given the circumstances, this just wouldn't be possible. The shadow clone method through which Kakashi taught Naruto requires Yamato to be there 24/7 suppressing the Nine Tails chakra so he doesn't transform mid-training session. Without Yamato there, it would be virtually impossible to teach Naruto something as taxing as that, which also brings up the point of why didn't they just call Yamato and do it instead of going on the time skip and wasting time. This is a common argument that's used to say that the time skip was meaningless since Naruto could have just stayed with Kakashi and yield greater results. However, this lacks a bit of context. Contrary to popular belief, this training method was not something that Kakashi knew during the time skip or even in the beginning of Shippuden. After Kakashi gets injured during the Kazekage rescue mission, he gets admitted into the hospital and stays there until the end of the Tenchi Bridge arc. While still in the hospital, he gets briefed of the whole situation including Sasuke by Yamato, and it's in response to the intel gained from Yamato about Sasuke's abnormal rate of maturation via the use of drugs and forbidden jutsu that he decides to super accelerate their own growth. He then tells Sakura that the whole time he was in the hospital, he'd been brainstorming a method that could only work with Naruto, that being the shadow clone training method. With this bit of context in mind, it's pretty clear that the thought of the method just wouldn't exist during the time skip since there would be nothing to catalyze its conception. The whole reason it exists is due to the huge disparity in power that Sasuke showed after the time skip, because based on all reasonable estimates, Sasuke was never supposed to be that strong. It would be entirely unreasonable for anybody to account for that, so again, it makes no sense for there to be a need for the method beforehand, much less deem it necessary. I've also heard arguments of increased chakra control being something he gained over the time skip, which I can stand behind to an extent given that he came back back with a bigger Rasengan. However, just like with the arguments I made in the first section, the series does a piss poor job at making this feel like it's the case. I can accept Naruto learning to control his chakra better, but for this setup to pay off, there has to be some significant practical application of the chakra control in battle to justify spending 3 years training it. We don't even get any specifics as to what aspect of chakra control he even trained, whether it's internal chakra manipulation, body enhancement, or chakra emission, so it's hard to pinpoint any specific area he had developed in. The most we got outside of the bigger Rasengan is the fact that Jiraiya taught him taijutsu, but we don't get many displays from Naruto in the early arcs of Shippuden to justify it even being a plot point, which goes back to what I've been saying, that the series does a terrible job at properly highlighting the fruits of Naruto's labor. It just tells us he got better, but refuses to properly show us how much he did. Now, this claim is one that I was shocked that a lot of people had, and it's the idea that Naruto should have came back from the time skip with Sage Mode. However, this makes zero sense. People tend to forget that the training for Sage Mode is not like regular ninjutsu training, and it's not just chakra control. The whole point of Sage Mode is that you have to be completely still. As a matter of fact, it's told to us directly that the hardest thing for an animal to do is to be absolutely still, and the training is high-level stuff. The rebuttal to this would be that they have the toad oil to expedite the process. However, the purpose of the toad oil isn't to bypass the need to sit still. Its purpose is to help the trainee grasp the concept of sensing nature energy in the environment, not the actual transformation part. And this is pretty much confirmed with Pa telling Naruto that after he mastered toad oil assisted control, he needed to master controlling nature energy without the use of the oil. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because you are not convincing me that the hyperactive, knuckle-headed, and borderline ADHD ninja that is 12-year-old Naruto is learning a technique that requires him to sit completely still for hours at a time. Naruto at that point in the series was nowhere close to the level of maturity and mental serenity to even attempt this form of training. Remember that over the course of the early Shippuden and into the Pain arc, Naruto made many strides in relation to his mental stability and maturity as a person. After the Tenchi Bridge incident, he has a moment of self-reflection in his conversation with Yamato, where he comes to terms with the fact that he had been relying on the nine-tailed fox and letting his emotions get the better of him. And not only did he let it get the better of him, he enjoyed the rush of power that leasing himself to the nine-tails gave him. Naruto coming to terms with that and accepting it did numbers for Naruto's maturity as a person. He was also forced to process the loss of Jiraiya, which not only does grief naturally force you to grow up in some instances, the loss of Jiraiya was also something that deepened his resolve to learn Sage Mode, even if it's fundamentally against his brash nature. I just don't see a world where Kid Naruto has the level of mental stability, maturity, and serenity to become a sage, especially since Jiraiya never mastered it himself, which then leads me to the conclusion that only a Naruto from the point he did achieve it and onwards could achieve it. But even if we look at it from a practical standpoint, the Naruto that learned Sage Mode had years of chakra control training from the training he did with Kakashi, so there is no real basis to say that a vastly more inexperienced version of himself could even attempt to do it, especially since it's stated and shown that the Shadow Clone glitch just doesn't work with Sage Mode training due to the increased risk of petrification. There is also the fact that Jiraiya imparted his philosophy of peace onto Naruto over the time skip, which was integral to his development into the Child of Prophecy, as well as it being a crucial part to him winning over pain. Now, as it relates to him learning to use Kurama's power, I won't harp on him too bad, since it's pretty unfair to expect him to achieve anything more than that, given the various limitations there are to accessing the Nine-Tails power. It's shown to us that even going into V1 is extremely dangerous, to the point that Jiraiya tells Kakashi that even if only one tail appears, he should shut it down immediately. It also doesn't help that the rate in which the Nine-Tails power surges is almost exponential, where the more you access, the more the hatred that's attached to the chakra binds to your heart, causing you to access more, feeding into the cycle. This feedback loop essentially makes it so the body is in a constant state of destroying and repairing itself, which could potentially lead to irreparable damage, and as such it's just a bad idea to go beyond the initial phases. There is this misconception that the goal of the entire time skip was for the purpose of learning to control the Nine-Tails power. However, this is a huge misconception. During their time over the time skip, Naruto's seal was getting progressively weaker, so in order to restrain Naruto, who started transforming during a random training exercise, Jiraiya used the spell key to tighten the seal. But since the seal was still loose, he didn't know when Naruto was gonna transform again, and as such he decided to deliberately use the key to open up the seal so he could train Naruto into controlling the power. This entire operation failed, as we all know, and it's this sequence of events that led to the initial Four Tails transformation that injured Jiraiya over the time skip. There is no other piece of evidence in the manga that says that Jiraiya's goal for the time skip was to teach Naruto how to control Kurama. As a matter of fact, we were directly told the reasons for the 3 years by Jiraiya himself, who makes it clear that his goal was to make Naruto a fully fledged ninja, likely in reference to Naruto not being as well-rounded as he needed to be to learn anything significant and be able to put whatever he learned to use. As we established earlier, Naruto came back faster and stronger due to the taijutsu training, to the point that he was able to fight on par with Sai, who was an ex-Anbu member, as well as being taught genjutsu resistance, which he demonstrated in his fight against Itachi. Obviously it didn't work against him since he's the best genjutsu user in the series, but it's implied that Naruto was gonna break it. Itachi just upped the potency to stop him from doing so. But with that being said, we circle back to the initial question as to whether or not the time skip was worthless, and the answer to that is that it's complicated. Up until this point, we've pretty much established that Naruto did gain some sort of benefit from the training, that much is true. However, I don't think that enough was given for it to justify it being 3 years. We've all seen how fast Naruto grows and the levels of power he was able to gain over the course of part 1, so you can't really blame people for wanting more, and it would have honestly been a lot better received if the time frame was shorter. The only justification I can think of for it is that since Jiraiya's goal was to make him a full-fledged ninja, he was going to cover all the information Naruto lacked growing up, essentially making up for the 8 years that Naruto was a flunky in the academy, plus taking him from that point to a shinobi who can fight alongside Anbu members. This to me is the best reasoning you can make for the 3 years, alongside the fact that Naruto is an incredibly stubborn and impatient student, but even with that being the case, this was never really conveyed to us and is just my interpretation. Now remember in the first section where I said that all of this may not entirely be a bad thing? Well, that's because I believe that Kishimoto wrote it this way on purpose. I think that the entire point of Naruto seemingly being underpowered coming off of the 3-year time skip in comparison to Sasuke was to serve as a wake-up call for Naruto, since it's clear that his convictions weren't as strong as he believed them to be. This is exactly why Sasuke said that he should have been training instead of chasing him, and why Naruto had a mental breakdown from realizing his weakness. Then when you add the subplot of Sasuke accelerating his growth through dark means and Naruto learning through clever shortcuts, you get a recipe for one of the most compelling parallels within the series. But with actually all of that being said, I think it's pretty clear that the time skip was not worthless. It was just kinda ass for 3 years. Bye B.